Hello, this is Dr. Jason Munsell. It is Saturday afternoon, almost 4 o'clock. Holy moly, almost 4 o'clock Saturday afternoon. Hope you're having a delightful Saturday. What I wanted to do is to go back to chapter 2 on the stuff on privacy and sort of go through the rest of the chapter with you. I'm not sure how much more stuff I'll get to today. I'll try to get to chapter 3 tomorrow. Chapter 3 is the stuff on online dating. It's basically self-presentation on online platforms, the web dating sites, like the profiles that one can make. But in any case, hope you're doing well. I'm going to try to be very brief about this, but we'll see. So last time, if you watched it, I sort of reeled myself back in and talked about some of the deficit approaches to CMC and various things like that. This is going back to chapter 2, as I said, where I had the other chapter 2 lectures that sort of stopped in the middle. And so I'm starting here on page 26, where it talks about the influence of decision criteria and privacy disclosure choices. So, some interesting information, what influences our decisions to put stuff on the internet, the privacy disclosure choices that we make. The book starts by, all this, by the way, is applying the communication privacy management idea. But there are several other things to think about. The first sort of big thing is issues of higher or lower self-consciousness. Basically, all that means is that apparently there are folks who have higher levels of self-consciousness than others. That is, people have private self-consciousness and public self-consciousness. And so there are some folks who think more deeply about their internal thoughts, and there are some folks who think more deeply about how folks out there are going to interpret the stuff that we share. So basically it says this: in both cases, bloggers with higher public and private self-consciousness levels employed more of a public orientation toward the management of blogging disclosure and privacy management practices, disclosing more and seeking a wider array of individuals to provide feedback about their thoughts than individuals with less self-consciousness. Does that make any sense whatsoever? No, not really. But basically the idea is the more mindful we are about things, perhaps that changes how we seek information from others or feedback from others, how we decide to put stuff on the internet or not. I mean, some people are just mindless. They don't think about things, right? Because I'm going to put this on, whatever. And other people go, let me think about that. Maybe, well, what are the consequences of people? So that's all that means. So how much we think about things, in a sense, influences what we put up and what we don't put up. That's it, pretty much. The second thing, so basically higher generally means you spend more time thinking about it. The next thing is self-monitoring and concern for appropriateness, and we have yet another little another little abbreviation, the CFA. What's the CFA? A CFA is concern for appropriateness. Do you have high levels of CFA? Sometimes. So basically, there's a really good summary, I say, here in the middle of page 27 about this idea, the body of research on CFA. From this body of research, an initial set of conditions emerge that serve as online decision criteria that drive the way that privacy rules are developed, ultimately guide the choices of CMC interactions. Thus, decisions about privacy rules to use are predicted on the degree to which people are private or public in their orientation to self-consciousness, whether they engage in high or low self-monitoring, and what their public-private orientation is to behavioral appropriateness when interacting online, blah, 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 blah. So basically, like the self-monitoring, self-monitoring is basically monitoring yourself and constantly double checking what you say before you say it. I mean, you all know people who say stuff, without thinking. That's generally what self-monitoring is. And there are folks who are high self-monitors. There are folks who are low self-monitors. And it says while high self-monitors were more cautious about acting overly public CMC disclosure and privacy management practices on their blogs, they ultimately blog more frequently because, all this stuff was on blogs. But basically, given all that type of stuff, the big summary here, before we get to issues of gender, is basically that when we are thinking about and deciding on what to put on the internet and what not to put on the internet, all this sort of, our levels of self-consciousness and whether we more are about private versus public, and how we are more mindful about the consequences of both, and the degree to which we actually monitor our own speech and monitor our own everything, and how concerned we are for how people are going to interpret stuff in the first place, right? So if you don't care what people are going to think, then obviously that's going to impact your decision as to what to put on or what or not. So what we have so far, these decisions are basically this high or lower self-consciousness within these levels of private or public, self-monitoring, and the CFA. And then they move to talking about gender. And they do rightfully talk about how there is a difference between sex and gender. And I know people get that confused all the time. Sex obviously is the biological, gender is the socialized expectations of how we should behave, even though all that stuff is problematic. We must get away from either or thinking. But they do say gender rules oftentimes, or gender norms, impact issues of privacy. Because men and women tend to have a different set of needs where privacy is concerned, they say, they use different privacy rules to regulate the disclosures that they make to others. Child is not a child, scholar, explore connections between bloggers' orientations toward privacy management on blogs and gender as an individual difference criteria, blah, blah, blah. This is so sciencey. From this study, women were more concerned with blogging privacy management and as such use more coded language in their blogs. Does that make sense? Does that women are going to be a little bit more cautious about disclosing things than men? Yeah. I mean, that's unfortunately our world. So we also have gender as a variable here when folks are making decisions on disclosing stuff that might be more private than public, and thus making it public. Then there's a little section here on the influence of family privacy orientations. And there is, just these different types of orientations on the top of page 28. There's, families also attempt to socialize new members, such as spouses and children, teaching them the family privacy orientation. So basically, different families and people are raised to have different orientations to privacy. Yeah. And so basically, the idea is that there are two types of privacy boundaries here that we oftentimes learn in the family. First, there are internal privacy cells where private information is held and controlled by only certain members within the family. And then the second families also have an external privacy boundary where the whole family ascribes to a rule about what can and cannot be disclosed outside of the whatever. So, privacy chamber. So we learn issues of privacy, keep it in the family, blah, 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 type of stuff that we then take to the rest of our world. And then also, it makes sense about, things that we disclose or do not disclose about our family online, but it's two things at the same time here. We're both learning about what is private and what should be private, what should be public, but also family. So, obviously, children develop their own sense of privacy, and so we have, again, this idea of de-individuation. So basically, the process of de-individuation that adolescents and young adults experience represent their claim to their own personal privacy boundaries with rules that they develop control apart from the family. Clearly, the family orientation of privacy is still there, but oftentimes we gain our own sense of privacy. Maybe you grew up in a family that privacy was very, very important, whereas, and still, but maybe you decided, nah, it wasn't so much. There was a main difference between my family and my wife's family. In my wife's family, apparently, bedrooms were shut. Nobody came in. Which makes sense. People respected each other's privacy. In my house, where I grew up, if your door's closed, it doesn't freaking matter if somebody's going to come in. But in any case, that it all sort of depends. Cough. And then there's also this interesting thing about blogging on the bottom of page 28. The findings indicate that blogging privacy management practices for individuals who live with their parents were no different from individuals who do not live with their parents. So, basically, okay, because living in their parents' households for young adults may be an influential factor. That's why they have these little codes for parents are in the room. Blah blah blah. Child also assessed the impact that being under the same roof might have on privacy choices. The findings indicate that blogging privacy management practices for individuals who live with their parents were no different from individuals who do not live with their parents. So the influence of being under the same roof as the parents does not necessarily change decisions about privacy if you are a young adult living with your parents. However, the study found another clue to unpacking this riddle because the majority of participants are certain their parents did not read or know anything about their blogging disclosure practices. Yeah, whatever. Okay, so there we go. So family is another influence on what how we approach our notions of privacy and what we decide, if we're even conscious of it or even thinking about it, even cognizant about it, what we put on the internet. Then they have this big section about the influence of context, and so it depends on our goals. I mean, we have certain goals, perhaps, depending on the situation or the context. There is obviously the example I have here. Obviously, there's some differences in when you are buying stuff online, the type of stuff that you will disclose, versus if you're trying to seek different types of information. Like if you're trying to figure out if you're dying and go to WebMD and put in symptoms and stuff like that, you might give some more. And I don't know what they do with that. But basically, it just says, all this stuff is basically, depending on the context, we tend to, that context impacts what we decide to disclose or not disclose. Oftentimes, we will withhold or falsify information depending on the situation, depending on the context. It says here, organizations have the common practice of soliciting a substantial amount of privacy information in exchange for promises of free promotional products. Give us your views on this and you will get a candy bar. They will send it to you in the mail. Withholding or falsifying private information is a common way to enact privacy protection rules. The strategy is similar to the way bloggers use codes, blah, 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 blah. So oftentimes we'll fill this stuff out that it's false, so we get free stuff, I guess. Okay. There's Facebook and privacy features it talks about. You can, and a lot of my privacy features of Facebook are not as powerful as they could be, but you can pick who can see your stuff and all that type of stuff. So there's a lot of things that you can do there. I'll let you read it when you get the book. I do think the big stuff about, and I'm skipping some pages here, but the big stuff here about face-to-face versus Facebook. Again, I hate the idea of versus because everything is. But it's really, really interesting. The middle of page 30. This is what it says. The findings of some scholar study bring into question the perceptions and rule differences people have for face-to-face interactions as opposed to those they have on Facebook. This is the big thing that I've been talking about the entire time. I mean, I argue that